Good afternoon. I'm Islay from the New Zealand Taxpayers Union, and I'm here with Joe Ascroft, our in-house economist. Joe was at the budget lockup today, and he's going to talk us through his initial thoughts. So, Joe, this is New Zealand's first Wellbeing Budget. What kind of expectations surrounded the budget in the lead up to its release, and have those expectations been met?
Well, I think expectations were high. The government's been selling this new well-being approach for over a year now, with this idea that it was going to be transformational, that we were going to move away from GDP, finances, figures, to a more holistic approach, taking into account how people felt, whether they had friends, whether they lived in a nice neighbourhood, whether they were mentally well, and all these other factors. So it was sold as transformational. In reality, it probably doesn't meet expectations. There'll be a lot of people out there disappointed, looking at the headline spending figures and probably being slightly confused. For example, the main direct spend on mental wellbeing is about $823 million the government's allocating, whereas they're spending about 3 times that much on trains, whether that's Kiwi Rail, Regional Rail, the Auckland City Rail Link. They're spending over $1 billion on new planes for the Air Force. That might be nice if you're in the Air Force, you enjoy flying the planes. It might be good for our defence strategy, but it probably doesn't speak to the vision that the government sold, which was, if you were struggling to get by, the government was going to provide this great wraparound strategy, wraparound services to help you out. What we were sold isn't quite what we got on paper in the lockup today.
And which ministers and departments did get a lot out of the budget today?
Well, New Zealand First will be thrilled. New Zealand First will be absolutely stoked because Winston Peters and Shane Jones get to go to Kiwi Rail with $1 billion. It'll be interesting to see how much of that ends up in Northland, heading up to Northport with the spur there. Obviously, they're targeting that seat, that region politically. So New Zealand First will be thrilled with that. Ron Mark as well from New Zealand First will be excited that he's finally got the funding for the P8 plans that he's been wanting. So again, look, people talk about how this is a New Zealand First run government. They basically scrapped the capital gains tax. They have scrapped a whole range of other policies, 3 strikes. And again, now they're coming into the budget with billions and billions of dollars. So New Zealand First ministers will be thrilled.
Any big losers?
The Greens will be slightly disappointed. I think there's about $200 million for a sustainability fund or something like that. But ultimately, again, the Greens have been put right off to the sidelines. They clearly don't have the negotiating power. They're clearly not willing to flex their negotiating power. And that's why New Zealand First, similar sized party we're getting billions of dollars for their pet projects, and the Greens are getting very little. I mean, the other obvious loser today are taxpayers. I noticed today, the last budget we had, where we had tax cuts, both legislated in budget and actually delivered, was 2010. So if you're a taxpayer, next year will be 10 years since the last budget when you've got tax cuts. And instead today we've had, wage indexation for benefits. The beneficiaries have won. People like trains. Train lovers have absolutely won today. The Defence Force has done really well today. There's been a range of other projects for Pacifica languages, the Maori language whānau, or a range of other projects. So, the recipients of those projects have had a great day. But taxpayers will be looking at this thinking, when am I going to get some reprieve? When am I going to get a break? So, another bad, sad year for taxpayers, really.
Of those, or any of the announcements today, was there a particularly clear example of wasteful spending?
Well, I had to go back to Kiwi Rail, but I think Kiwi Rail first and foremost, right? Kiwi Rail was bought in 2008 and restructured as a state-owned enterprise. And state-owned enterprises are meant to run a profit. That's their role. The government has owned a range of power companies in the past as state-owned enterprises. They have other state-owned enterprises. Their role is to make money, but be owned by taxpayers. Kiwi Rail has never once in its existence as a state-owned enterprise paid a single cent in dividends to the government. Not 1 cent in dividends. And today, Kiwi Rail is getting another $1 billion. So it'll be interesting to see what Kiwi Rail does with that money. I would not be shocked to see it go into the Northland Rail spur or other projects near Northport. It just looks politically wasteful.
And do you think that there are potentially unforeseen expenses, risks that taxpayers should be looking out for?
I think one thing I noticed, Chris Bishop actually pointed this out on the internet earlier, only $150 million has been allocated for the gun buyback scheme as part of the changes in the wake of the terrorist attack in Christchurch. And most estimates or most expectations had the gun buyback costing significantly more than $150 million. So taxpayers should keep an eye on that and see how much it ultimately ends up costing, because it wouldn't be surprising to see that blow out to $300, $400, $500 million.
And how are economic forecasts tracking compared to any expectations?
I mean, things are still tracking reasonably well. We're not forecast to go into a recession anytime soon. There's no massive headwinds on the horizon, but clearly things have taken a little bit of a turn for the worse. So growth is expected to average 2.6% per annum over the next 5 years, which is a little bit lower than what we were tracking at earlier. A bit of that will be capital gains tax, worsening business sentiment. A lot of it will be international sentiment. You know, the trade winds have been getting worse. The tariffs being imposed on China and the United States clearly have some impact. But one thing that I thought was really interesting in the budget and the latest figures is the absolute falling off a cliff of business investment growth. So last year, 2018, business investment growth grew at 6.8%. That's pretty strong. That's pretty good. But Treasury's now forecast that business investment growth is only going to grow at 0.7% for the year of 2019. It is amazing what the promise of a capital gains tax has done to business sentiment. It's amazing what the heavy hand of regulatory burdens in the oil and gas ban and the other regulations the government is imposing on the economy has done to business sentiment. I'd be pretty surprised even if business investment growth picked up to the levels that Treasury is projecting in years out if the same economic strategy continues.
At the very least, is the government's achievement and expenditure value for money measurable under this budget?
Well, it is measurable in the sense that we can, look at the books, see how things are tracking, see whether they're meeting expectations in years ahead. But what's really interesting is you're actually moving away from a heavy focus on measuring the things that matter. Treasury should be focusing first and foremost on economic growth, whether we're getting good value for money, whether taxpayers are getting good, responsible, efficient, accountable government. That is what they should be focusing on. But when you look at the budget materials this year, when you open up the nice big glossy booklets that they've produced, you see that things have changed quite a bit. Now they're focusing on the 4 capitals: social capital, natural capital, all these other kind of fuzzy frameworks for the way we should be living our lives. And I can't help but feel that our ability to measure the government, and measure the economy, and measure the things that actually really matter to people's back pocket, and when they go home and have to pay for groceries and power and all that kind of stuff, has actually gotten worse. I think Treasury is going to have to seriously consider whether they're taking the right approach, particularly in light of this week's scandal. They might have some capability problems.
And finally, would a national-led budget look very different from this?
Honestly, I don't know if it would. Look, the opposition has announced that they want to tie tax rates to inflation. That's a really, really positive thing. The Taxpayers Union's been campaigning for that for many, many years. So that would be a positive change if National got back into power, that they'd do that. But, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and some of the viewers at home will be old enough to remember, that National increased benefit rates by a significant amount not too many years ago. It's not too different to increase benefit rates when you have a national government to having a Labour government when you want to index benefit rates with wages. So National will be talking a lot of talk today, but it's important to have a strong taxpayers union, so we can obviously put pressure on both parties, because if someone's not watching them, it'll be more wasteful spending, it'll be higher taxes, and government gets more opaque.
Great, thank you.